Hello. So I'm just doing a quick one today. Well, this is a quickie. So empathy's very interesting to me. I've been studying it in the reptile community, keeping community for a while now. And I mean, come to a conclusion that we talked about the brain. So this side of the brain has your empathy right here. And this side, actually, the same spot on this side is actually your basic stuff, like your blinking and your breathing and anything that's basically an automatic. On this side, the human calculator actually uses the same spot, like a quarter size spot, to do calculations. It's really fascinating. So this side inside is actually your modeling, part of your empathy. If you yawn, I yawn. And so this gray matter is actually the thalamus. And Einstein his brain was actually larger, but it wasn't because it had more neurons. They found that it actually had more gray matter, more thymus. So this is interesting. So I talk about this as a sphere. So this right here, as you grow, your imagination's actually here. So as this grows, this makes this connection. And in this thalamus is myelin. And it creates this massive connection between the two. And this is why some of us actually have extra empathy, why we can actually put ourselves in other people's shoes. Not modeling. Almost everybody but a psychopath has actual modeling. They can yawn when somebody else yawns, but not everybody can put themselves in other people's shoes. That's something that is developed and grown, and pathways are grown between them, I believe. That's my theory, which makes so much sense. So when we look at this, it's why the reptile brain doesn't actually have empathy like that, because they have empathy. And that empathy modeling part should be this optic tantrum. I know I've mentioned this before, but this optic tantrum is this modeling part of your empathy is somewhere in this. But this tantrum, the thymus, is actually the gray matter. And that gray matter links the two, because this is your memory. This is where their imagination and empathy would actually exist, is in this red. I just call it the memory stuff. It's the cortex. So when we're talking about that, there's no direct connection here like there is in the human brain. So like I said, here, this part and this part at the top do actually have multiple pathways to get there. Multiple. Now, if you're thinking of an autistic kid, brain is overgrowth before the age of 2. And often it's this. So therefore, this would make it harder to create those pathways, which makes sense why they would struggle to be able to empathize. And so we can see that in a reptile. While a reptile is very autistic in its own right, because there is no pathway here that allows their imagination and their empathy to directly connect. It actually has to take a much harder route to get a direct connection. Where this is, and that's the point, is the directness of the connections. So that being said, it's very interesting. We can actually see something here though too. I mean, when we look at the gray matter, imagine if the gray matter actually went north and it actually grew and actually connected fully here between the red and the green, the forest green. What if it grew right there? Then reptiles would be capable of true empathy, of being able to put themselves in somebody else's shoes. They would be able to. That's a crazy theory. And a crazier theory, smarter reptiles have more thalamus connecting the two. That makes so much more sense. Wow, that makes sense. The thalamus connecting the two might be more increased, might be thicker, things like that. It's really fascinating. Really, really fascinating. And we're going to get into that. We're going to start looking at things like that here in a minute with other reptiles. But another thought that I've had since the last video, this red spots here, that's actually what's in control of the Blackbeard. Their actual language center. To me, that makes sense. It's weirdly because it's a language. If it's a language, then that's the part of the brain that would come out of. But it's a language that's written into their DNA. Is it there or is it in the optic tentum? Because it's one or the other. It's not both. It's one or the other. It's very interesting. Because the smell, and they will smell. And so when you have that, it goes in and it actually goes, okay, this is what's happening around me. I can smell. I remember that there's other animals here. So I'm going to head bob. That's got to be in the red spot. I mean, but it might be in the optic tentum. The tentum. Where the empathy is, where modeling of the empathy is in that, which is really freaking fascinating to me, because that really does suggest that the red spot, and that's in the higher level, so that would explain the actual sensory things, because it's like we talked about before, their back's going black. That is actually most likely going to consist of the cerebral or the medulla eventually. And so when we look here, we can see that the medulla, and man, so the ability to change would be in the medulla. And possibly the cerebral, which is the back half of the brain, the very back end. But yet, and this would explain why it's delayed for it to happen, because it actually has to coordinate all these things in its brain. And so if it's overstressed, that tantrum, the thalamus will create a bigger connection between the pieces that actually do it. And I'm really theorizing right now that it's the red in their memory. So they can they'll Blackbeard off of smells and emotions. Their emotions are in the red. That's 100%. So it's got to be that red is where their Blackbeard originates from, and then goes through the thalamus. And if they're over stressed, that thalamus will increase the myelin between the two systems, making it faster to act. When you train, and reptile, the systems will connect through the thalamus. They'll create more gray matter between the two, more myelin, most likely. That's probably what's happening. And so it makes it a faster connection. To me, this is all really fascinating, how all this actually works. And it's really cool to think that I can sit here in my basement and actually think of this and imagine this. And yes, I am using my imagination for this. That's part of it. And that's really cool, in my opinion. Really cool. So let's thank you guys for watching this. I'm about to do an episode today for the snakes. So part 4, not part 3, will be snakes and comparing snakes to bearded dragon.